Gang violence and crime have been terrorizing the streets of Alaska. Despite what many people realize, Alaska has some of the most dangerous hoods, and it is only getting worse. In Alaska, there's Bloods, Crips, and countless other deadly street gangs that are forming right now as we speak. Life in Alaska is significantly different than anywhere else in the United States. People think of polar bears and igloos and completely disregard the growing criminal underworld. Alaska has had a big problem in recent history with hybrid street gangs that are forming with no structure or rules. Before we get into this crazy story, if you like these videos, take 1 second out of your day and hit that like and follow button. Because of all these new hybrid street gangs 2 years ago, they had a 67% increase in murder. One gang in particular was affecting the rising murder rate. The subject of our video, the 1488 gang, was a hybrid street gang originally formed in prisons in Alaska. As you guys will see later in the video, they have caused a lot of destruction. In Alaska, 67 days out of the year, you will not see any sunlight. Because of all the darkness and isolation, people feel like they're lost and they turn to unhealthy coping skills to try and escape their reality. Right now in Alaska, they have a serious problem with the abuse and misuse of illegal substances.
Risk from misuse of opioids prompted Alaska's governor to issue a disaster declaration in 2017, calling it an epidemic.
Typically, when there is widespread drug use mixed with inequalities and lack of opportunity, it's going to create an environment where gangs are fighting for control of the drug market. And the more money that comes in, the deadlier the gangs become.
The Pablo Escobar of Fairbanks has been sentenced to a total of 65 years in prison. 33-year-old Cody Stockton was sentenced to 50 years behind bars for first-degree misconduct involving a controlled substance. After that, he received an additional 15 years for first-degree robbery. Stockton's first charge was handed down on Wednesday.
Because of the lenient drug laws in Alaska, criminals feel emboldened to take advantage of some of Alaska's poorest and most rural areas.
This drug bust by the U.S. Attorney's Office is described as one of the biggest drug trafficking events in the history of Alaska. U.S. Attorney Lane Tucker says a multi-agency investigation by the Department of Justice has resulted in charges for 53 defendants across 9 indictments.
Authorities during this investigation received over 122,000 pills. Alaska is far from the winter wonderland that people make it out to be. Wait till you see how deadly these gangs and operations can be.
The accused allegedly participating in trafficking large amounts of deadly drugs throughout the state.
A lot of people feel lost in Alaska because of a struggling U.S. economy, and they form bad habits to cope with their stress.
Influx of fentanyl to our cities and villages has caused untold devastation throughout the state.
Lane Tucker, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Alaska, describes Heraclio Sanchez Rodriguez as running an organized crime and drug trafficking ring, targeting Alaska from his prison cell in California.
This man was near the top of the totem pole when it comes to plugs and was caught trying to launder more than $1.3 million.
The U.S. Attorney's Office also says Christina Quintana, who was an inmate at Highland Mountain Correctional Facility, was recruited by him to convince soon-to-be-released inmates from Highland
to get involved in his criminal organization. Women in Alaska are built different. Some of these girls are full-on gangstas that are ready to fill an op full of slugs if the situation arises. Just take a look at Christina Quintana, who was a queenpin and gang leader involved in this operation. When a woman showed up to a deal without all the necessary cash on hand, Christina snapped. She pistol whipped the woman and then fired up both of her legs, permanently damaging and nearly killing her.
Together, we have successfully dismantled one of the biggest drug trafficking rings harming Alaska communities in the history of our state.
Sanchez Rodriguez, Tamara Bren, and Kevin Peterson were tied to the drug ring, and per the Department of Justice, were indicted last October to the killings of Sunday Powers and Cami Clark near Trapper Creek in the spring of 2023.
When the United States Services received multiple packages with large amounts of illegal substances, someone was going to have to pay. Cami Clark, age 34, and her best friend Sunday Powers, age 30, were being tracked by. The leader of this illegal operation, Heraclio Sanchez Rodriguez, was the one tracking and stalking them through his prison cell. Because of his power and influence, he was easily able to smuggle iPhones, and he used his Snapchat to track the women's location. After finding out that both of the women were hanging out in Trapper Creek, he green-lighted the hit and sent his top male enforcer, Kevin Peterson, age 29, along with his top female enforcer, Denise Bren, age 42, take care of business. When they arrived to Trapper City, they notice that both the girls they are targeting are in their car. This is when they make a terrible decision. They carjack them, and even though the women comply as they're leaving the car, they fire them up and blow them both down in the back of the head. They then collected the money for the hit. And according to police, they go on a 3-day ice bender and throw crazy parties every single day. In less than 1 week, they had spent all the money they made from the hit.
Allegedly conspired to carjack, kidnap, and ultimately murder these 2 victims.
Alaska is a crazy place where they have no regard for human life. Even after getting away with a robbery, they still decided to catch a body.
At the direction of Sanchez Rodriguez and furtherance of the conspiracy, the victims were murdered with a firearm and buried in a shallow grave.
The grand jury also indicted Edward Guinness and Samantha Pearson of North Pole with offenses related to their alleged roles in giving
Illegal substances to this individual
that resulted in his death. But the 53 defendants total are all accused of taking part in spreading drugs, mainly fentanyl, in various regions of Alaska.
This investigation targeted and dismantled a drug network operating in California, Oregon, Washington State, and Alaska with the intent of distributing deadly fentanyl to communities in Alaska, including rural and Alaska Native villages.
These tiny Alaskan villages seem to always be taken advantage of.
David Zahn of Anchorage's Drug Enforcement Administration office says large amounts of fentanyl were seized as they were heading to rural Alaska villages. In some cases, he says the amount of doses seized outnumbered the population of the community.
The saddest thing about this is the fact that this is not just in Alaska. This deadly substance has affected all of our lives, and I am sure we have all lost a close friend, a loved one, or even just an acquaintance. Let's take a second and send out our prayers along with our condolences and good energy to all our lost friends and family members. For anyone that's never experienced substance abuse, whether that be a family member, a friend, your own child, or even yourself, and you decide to be judgmental and think you're better than those who have dealt with substance issues, you might start off like this: a sweet grandmother who loves nothing more than making cookies for her grandkids. Then out of nowhere, your life takes an unexpected turn for the worse. You get in a really bad car crash, and after a month of recovering, you're now fiending for Yerkes. As you get more and more hooked, eventually you run out and need to find a plug to grab them off of. The old lady you once were is a distant memory of the past. Over the next few months, as you get to know the plugs better, you start hanging out with them. Check out what happened to this Alaskan grandmother deeply involved in gangs.
Ooh, a tattered body.
I think I was aware with that freaky.
Smoking the dead up.
Smoking. Girl, what you smoking on? What we smoking on?
We're smoking on that dead up tag.
Oh,
The dead of the better.
Dead of the better. Folks, look right. Hey, stop playing my
Smoking the dead up tag.
This granny goon must have really hated her ops because she is constantly smoking on them. What is the process you would have to go through to join a gang in your early 70s? Life takes crazy turns. This could be you gang banging and a high-ranking member in a gang in your early 70s. Granny drillers and goons are top ops in the streets and will blick you down if they feel any form of disrespect. These fossils are highly respected in their hoods. These granny goons have multiple bodies under their belt and love smoking on the dead ops.
Talk to me, auntie. How we like them ops rolled up?
Oh, the deader the better.
Oh, the deader the better.
All it takes is one call from a high-ranking granny goon and you will be rolled up with all the other dead ops. Senior citizens joining gangs has become much more common than it used to be. Retirement community drillers have no fear of the law and will blick you down in the middle of the day if the beef is up. These goons drink all day and are always whacked out of their mind from all the hard narcotics they are prescribed. They are all strapped up with blowers, and when it's wartime, these boys are quick to fill you up with slugs. Just look at what happened at this retirement community.
Detectives believe this shooting is connected with another shooting also well before sunrise Friday morning on Prestonwood Drive in Valrico. Investigators say 2 suspects wearing hoodies shot up that house.
That's what you get when the beef is up in retirement communities. Expect bloodshed and a bunch of old man packs. This is especially common in Alaska, but it's happening everywhere. With how unpredictable life is, it's best not to judge and act like you're better than anyone, because tomorrow you could lose everything and be in their shoes. Some of these Alaskan granny drillers were directly involved in this drug bust.
More doses were seized than 4 times the population. In Good News Bay, 21 times, and in Tyonek, 44 times.
Captain Cornelius Sims of the Alaska State Troopers says it was teamwork to include efforts by the DEA and FBI that led to the charges announced Thursday.
To those that think they can bring dangerous drugs into our state without being held accountable, let this group of dedicated law enforcement officials demonstrate that we will not rest until we can find you, arrest you, and hold you accountable for your actions.
That couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, Alaska has some of the least strict drug laws in the entire United States of America.
First set of defendants was indicted in June. The Department of Justice says it continued its investigation so that all 53 accused of involvement could be named in the most recent indictment. Beth?
Another reason for the widespread drug use in Alaska could be attributed to the sky-high rates of depression this state is dealing with. Current data suggests that 1 out of every 5 Americans will deal with a form of depression at some point in their lifetime. And according to United States News and World Report, Alaska is currently the 5th most depressed state. And it's no surprise weather here can get as cold as -54°C during winter. Human beings crave interaction, and when you are stuck inside your house for months in freezing cold weather and no sunlight, it should come to no surprise why so many people are depressed in Alaska.
Northern Alaska community will not see the sunrise again for, get this, 2 months. The National Weather Service says following today's sunset, it's going to be dark in the town of Okiavik until January 23rd. Forecasters there say this is a part of a 66-day period of polar night. That's when the sun doesn't rise above the horizon.
Imagine how you guys would feel being stuck in your house for over 60 days. With no access to sunlight, all you see is complete darkness every morning. You can't even go for a morning run because it is too cold and dark. It's just you and your wife stuck in a house with nowhere to go and nothing to do other than watch TV or go to a bar and get completely belligerent. Because of all the isolation and alcoholism, Alaska is currently the most dangerous state for women.
The numbers would suggest that Alaska is a dangerous state for women.
A study in 2016 actually found it the most dangerous state in America, and I think it is particularly for women in rural areas where law enforcement isn't readily accessible.
A lot of our communities are super small, and the crime rate maybe doesn't justify a full-time trooper living in that community. So what we do is we base our troopers in what we call hub communities, so a larger community in a region. So like Kotzebue, for instance. We have troopers based there, and then the villages or smaller communities around there are serviced by my troopers out of Kotzebue. We spend a lot of money on travel to remove those people from those communities to get them to a place that has the forensic capability to do those interviews.
A lot of these small villages don't have the resources necessary to keep all of our queens safe. They just don't have the money or the police force. Sometimes the only way police can get to some of these really rural villages is on a snowmobile, so as you can imagine, there is a lot of added difficulties that other police officers in America are not dealing with.
There's just a lack of supervision and a cultural divide. I am not saying that urban areas do not have similar problems, because actually when you look at the proportion, it's similar. What I'm saying is that in some portions of the state, it is so pervasive that it's not regarded as being unusual behavior.
Women in Alaska are targeted for a number of different reasons. Alcoholism and substance abuse creates a dangerous environment for women, and because of the small population, there is not a great dating market, and many women end up settling for bad guys. The sad reality of the situation is the fact there are countless women in Alaska that are trapped in bad relationships. For the women living in isolated rural areas in Alaska, there isn't enough of a police force to provide a safe environment. Typically, police do not get involved until bodies start dropping. Look at what happened to Cynthia Hoffman, who was set up and killed by her best friend.
Bremer, along with Caden McIntosh and Caleb Leyland, all teenagers at the time, were charged with the murder of 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman. According to court documents, a then 21-year-old Darren Schillmiller of Indiana posed as a millionaire online, allegedly offering Bremer roughly $9 million to murder someone in Alaska. Bremer and McIntosh carried out the killing at Thunderbird Falls, borrowing Leyland's vehicle, where they bound Hoffman with duct tape before McIntosh shot her once in the head and pushed her into a river. Her body was found a few days later. In an Anchorage courtroom Wednesday, Bremer accepted a deal from the state in exchange for charges dropped.
She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, solicitation to commit murder in the first degree, 2 different theories of murder in the second degree, and a tampering with physical evidence.
Denali Bremer was the definition of a snake. She was this young lady's best friend all throughout her childhood and early adult life until she set her up to be chipped just so she could get the validation of a boy.
And while Cynthia's father, Timothy, was unable to attend in person, by phone he maintained his commitment to see the case through. To listen to the admission of guilt he's been waiting 3 years to hear.
It gave me a step in the direction where it was a sign of relief and that this is almost over. All I want is me and my daughter to have peace. And to have peace, this has to be done.
Bremer, now convicted with a guilty plea for first-degree murder, will go before a judge in late August.
So the Department of Corrections will go and do a lot of background investigation.
As you can imagine, the jury was absolutely disgusted by this act of betrayal and ended up sentencing Denali to 99 years in prison. Because of the weather and isolation, Alaska has some of the craziest crimes imaginable that sound like scripts from a movie. Life has gotten so difficult in Alaska that now the government is literally paying people just to live there. In order to qualify for this grant, all you have to do is live in Alaska for an entire calendar year. Then in the fall, the government will pay you up to $3,822 in what they call an energy relief payment. Now that you guys have an idea of what it is like living in Alaska, it's time we get into the deadly incident that happened with the brutal Alaskan Gang. 1488. This is a homegrown Alaskan gang that originally formed in the prisons. These guys are known for their extreme violence. They have been responsible for hundreds of bodies over the years, both in and outside of prison. Over the years, high-ranking members began getting released from prison, and now they have a lot of power in the streets and are heavily involved in the underground drug market in Alaska. Their influence is so big that they were able to spread all the way out to Colorado, where they have a small presence in the jail systems there. Before going into all the crazy crimes committed by this gang, let's talk about why people commit crimes or join gangs in the first place. When you grow up in an impoverished community that lacks opportunity for some of these young adults, they were essentially raised into a life of crime. Similar to superstar rappers like King Von, environments played a big factor in who they later became. Imagine what life would be like if you grew up in a trailer park and were enrolled in whatever local public school was in your area. You have minimal help from your father because he is always in and out of jail, and now after committing an armed robbery while out on parole, he is doing 9 years in prison. Best case scenario, he gets out with good behavior in 5 years. But because of how deadly the prisons are in Alaska, your old man is going to have to fight for his respect, so chances are he won't get credited with any good time. Now it's just you stuck at home with your mom, who is now struggling with alcohol and substance abuse. Over the years, you have a number of different stepdads. Some of them you love, and some of them are absolutely horrible. Now, as you enter high school, you become angry and feel like the world is against you. So you get a bunch of tattoos and start rebelling against society. You start hanging out with the bad crowd of kids at your school, and to your surprise, they all have similar backgrounds to you. A lot of your new friends' parents are also in jail or dealing with substance abuse. Because of your new bad boy image, you start receiving attention from girls. And now, for the first time in your life, you have friends, you have girls, and you are receiving validation, something you never felt since you were a child. People actually like you, but for all the wrong reasons. You're always in full crash out mode and willing to do anything to maintain the acceptance of your new friends. To help cope with some of that childhood trauma you so desperately want to forget, you turn to substances. You and your friends are drinking and blowing tree every day. Eventually, you drop out of high school because of this, and your criminal tendencies go up a notch. You start trapping yayo, and in between busting traps, you are indulging it as well. And in only a couple years, you escalate to selling ice, and your addiction starts to spiral. This addiction ends up being your downfall and costs you your freedom. During a weekend bender, you black out and rob a bank with your buddy. When you wake up in jail the next morning, you're not fully sure what happened. 4 months later, you're sentenced to 10 years in prison, and your only goal now is survival. Since you're a lone wolf in jail, all the other inmates are picking on you. One morning, after being severely beaten and robbed, a group of inmates approach you and ask if you want protection and to join their gang. What are you going to do in this situation? Are you going to try and tough it out for the next 10 years? Or are you going to join forces with the gang and get the brotherhood and protection you so desperately crave? This is the predicament countless inmates find themselves in. Either join a gang and risk being forced to commit crimes for that gang and potentially extend your sentence, or take your chances as a lone wolf and risk getting killed and never returning home. Can you honestly say that if life threw you all the same hurdles and you found yourself in the same situation, that you wouldn't at least consider joining up with an organization inside of prison? And while your past trauma isn't an excuse for your actions, it does help to humanize some of these criminals we are so quick to judge. Now let's get into how this gang was founded in the first place. The 1488 gang was formed by a 45-year-old man, Timothy Lobdell, while he was in prison for the attempted body of a police officer. He now goes by the name Filthy Furrer, but for the sake of the video, we're going to call him Timmy. Within prison, he was known as a loose screw and someone who carried a giant shank with him everywhere he went. He was a menace that nobody wanted to cross, but he had some redeeming traits. He was intelligent and pretty charismatic. He was someone who people naturally were drawn to, and he had a lot of heart. So as a result of his determination and leadership skills, he was able to successfully form the gang 1488 and have it be a respected organization out there on the yard. Some people compare them to the Aryan Brotherhood because they have similar ideologies. There are some big differences between the two groups. These guys are more about overt hate towards those who don't resemble them, and the Aryan Brotherhood is more about protection, brotherhood, and bonding. Like with all organizations, there's a leadership structure, and when you get sent out on a mission by a higher-ranking member, you better handle your business. The best way to go up the ranks is through overt acts of violence used to help further the gang. When Timmy decided he wanted his gang 1488 to have a presence outside of prison, that's when things truly got out of hand. Over the years, as members got released, there ended up being a large amount of free members in Alaska and some parts of Colorado. Timmy saw this as an opportunity to make a name for his gang on the streets. He was having his members get involved in the distribution of illegal substances, and at first he was making a boatload of money both in and outside of prison. His gang was mostly trapping ice, but they could get you anything you wanted. He had also began dabbling with the distribution of straps. Timmy wanted his gang involved with all aspects of the criminal underworld. Any form of illegal activity that people were making money off of, Timmy wanted a piece of the pie and for his guys to get involved. While lots of money was coming in, Timmy felt something was off. He felt like some of the members were not pulling their weight out there in the free world. He was feeling as if members used him for protection while in jail and then turned their backs once they got free. Some members just wanted to hang out with each other and drink beers, but when it came time to slide, nobody was picking up their phone. Timmy knew something had to be done. The gang he had put his blood, sweat, and tears into making only seemed to follow orders within prison. He couldn't seem to get his guys to bring their prison mentality out there on the streets of Alaska and Colorado. Everyone wanted to party and act tough in front of girls, but only about half the members were willing to risk years in prison for the gang. This was a huge problem for Timmy. He wanted his organization to be like the Norteños, where if a higher-ranking member sends you on a mission, you must complete it, otherwise you become the target of the mission. He wanted a militant operation with structure and full devotion from all his members. Because of how charismatic he was, Timmy had countless connections in the criminal underworld. He had a lot of buddies in the Hells Angels, which was a biker organization that he had a lot of respect for. The two groups were known to conduct business together. They were both involved in the distribution of ice and would rely on each other for certain deals to go through. It is even rumored that they had gone on a couple missions together in the past. The two groups were that close. Eventually, Timmy had it with some of his members and had gotten bloodthirsty. The next person to mess up was going to get the full wrath of Timmy. Member of 1488, Michael Staton had struggled with addiction his whole life. He was willing to do just about anything for that next hit of ice. So he decided to make a terrible decision and stole from members from both 1488 and the Hells Angels. This was all the ammunition Timmy needed to place a green light on Michael, and within a couple days he had developed a plan to take him out. On August 3rd of 2017, the plan went into motion, and Timmy enlisted the help of his most savage members. This was going to be a complete crash-out mission, but it was something he felt had to be done. So he sent 3 1488 members and 1 Hells Angels member who had previously had money stolen from Michael to handle the hit. This was going to be an absolute bloodbath. The members involved in the hit were 43-year-old 1488 high-ranking member Royan Otten, whose nickname was Thumper, a 40-year-old crash-out dummy Glenn Baldwin, who went by the nickname Glenn Dog, a younger man Coulter Odell, who was a hothead and only 29 at the time. He was a hang-around and still had to earn his stripes so he could get full membership into the gang, and his 56-year-old buddy that he worked with that had stuff stolen from him, Craig King, whose nickname was Okie, and was a high-ranking member in the Hells Angels. The plan was to kidnap and brutalize Michael. First, to try and hide evidence, they covered a room in one of the members' houses with plastic. They then invited Michael to come hang out and drink some beers. As soon as he arrives, he realizes it's a setup. They hold him down and forcibly remove all of his 1488 tattoos. They then bring him into another room also covered in plastic. Here he is beaten, tortured, and humiliated in the worst ways imaginable until his body gives out, and they bring him to the woods. This is where they make a terrible decision and fire him up, resulting in a quick end to his life. Help me! They then take matches and lighter fluid, and in order to hide evidence, they light Michael up as if he was a ciggy. After word gets back to Timmy that the mission is completed, he is beyond happy and anoints Odell as a full patch member in 1488. Craig King, who was in the Hells Angels, was also beyond ecstatic about what happened because he was able to get his Hells Angels jacket back from Michael, who had previously stolen it. If you steal someone's Hells Angels jacket, something like this is bound to happen no matter where you live. It was great vibes in these organizations who were partying it up and living their life to the fullest. They had the girls, they had the money, and were living the good life. But like with all serious crimes, eventually you are going to be arrested, especially today with all the cameras and technology police have available to them. Police were on their trail, and it was only going to be a matter of time until they caught up with them and they faced consequences for their heinous crimes.
5 members and associates have been sentenced in Alaska this week for life in prison without parole and charged in federal court with prison for racketeering, kidnapping, and murder.
The convicted include a person formerly known as Timothy Lobdell, age 46, who legally changed his name to Filthy Führer. 46-year-old Roy Naughton, also known as Thumper, 41-year-old Glenn Baldwin, known as Glenn Dog, and 30-year-old Coulter Odell, and 57-year-old Craig King, also known as Hokey.
According to court documents and evidence presented at the trial, the men were leaders, members, and associates of the 1488s that operated inside and outside of state prisons throughout Alaska.
Now, the sentencing comes after the 2017 murder of Michael Staton, a former member of the gang in Wasilla, and the kidnapping and assault of 2 people that same year. According to the Justice Department, the gang has written rules, a code of conduct, and a creed which states that the only currency we recognize is violence and unquestionable loyalty.
Rest in peace to Michael. My prayers and condolences go out to his family and friends. Regardless of whatever he was into, at the end of the day, every human life matters and every single human has the ability to change their life for the better. There are countless examples of members from all organizations, from the Crips to the Aryan Brotherhood, that with age turned their life around for the better, but unfortunately Michael never had that opportunity. For all the criminals that were involved in this heinous crime and are now serving life sentences, if you commit the crime, be ready to do the time, because you will get caught. And if you like this video, make sure to comment, drop a like, and hit that follow button.